All right, let's start with our Parasha study. In today's Parasha portion, we will be starting reading the book of Deuteronomy, which is a very interesting book. Actually, it is considered as the diary of Moses, because in it Moses recalls everything that happened from the Exodus until the day he died. Today's Parasha is from book of Deuteronomy, chapter 1, verse 1, to chapter 3, verse 22. And we can divide it in 7 segments, which is the events at Horeb recalled, the appointment of the tribal leaders, Israel's refusal to enter the land, the penalty for Israel's rebellion. It talks about the desert years, and then the defeat of King Sihon and the defeat of King Og. The book of Deuteronomy begins with the words, "These are the words which Moses spoke to all Israelites." We find that in chapter 1, verse 1. This is where we get the Hebrew name of Devarim, which means words. As I already said, the book of Deuteronomy is considered as the diary of Moses. And in it, Moses again goes through the Torah, and also he is reminding the Israelites and the Hebrew mixed multitude about what they had been through in the 40 years of traveling in the desert. And he has a reason for doing that. Another ancient name for the book of Deuteronomy is Mishnah HaTorah, which means repetition of the Torah. This is important to know because many people refer to the book of Moses as the second law. It is not the second law. There is only one law. God gave only one law once. So this is the repetition of the Torah. Actually, the English word Deuteronomy, which comes from the Greek word Deuteronomos, means the second law. That's what it means, the second law. But it is not the second law, it is a repetition of God's law. Why is this important to emphasize? It is important because when Yeshua Messiah comes to rule during the millennium, he will not be teaching Roman Catholicism, he will not be teaching evangelical modern day churches teachings or any Jehovah's Witness teachings, but he will be teaching the Torah. The same Torah that was spoken from Mount Horeb to the people. As it is written in the book of Isaiah, chapter 2, verse 3, "Then many peoples will come and say, 'Come, let us go up the mountain of Adonai to the house of the God of Jacob. Then he will teach us his ways,'" which is the Torah, "and we will walk in his paths. For the Torah will go forth from Zion, and the word of Adonai from Jerusalem." So when Yeshua comes, he will be teaching us what? Another law, the second law? No, he will be teaching us the Torah, the same Torah which we find in the 5 books of Moses. Even in the book of Zechariah, chapter 8, verse 23, it says, "Thus says Adonai Tzavayot, in those days it will come to pass that 10 men from every language of the nations will grasp the corner of the garment of a Jew, saying, 'Let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you.'" So, as you can see, it is not the second law, but the repetition of the Torah, which people will be learning. This even brings down the replacement theology which is preached in today's modern day evangelical churches. A big part of the book of Moses is considered as a rebuke from Moses to the Israelites. In fact, first rebuke is found in the very beginning of the book, in verse 6. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 6, it says, "Adonai our God spoke to us at Horeb, saying, 'You have stayed long enough at this mountain.'" Why is it a rebuke? Because they were happy to stay there. When God told them, "You need to go to Canaan." Canaan is the promised land. But no, they were happy to remain there, therefore already forgetting or ignoring what God said to them when he promised them the land of Canaan. Again, from verse 19 to verse 32, we read about the story of the spies. Another rebuke. You did not believe God. So here again, Moses is rebuking the people for the lack of their faith. But remember, he's preparing them to enter the promised land. What many do not point out from the story is what Moses is actually saying. It is a rebuke, yes, but more than a rebuke, Moses is reminding them how faithful God was with them during the 40 years in the desert. When he's rebuking the Israelites, you did not believe God, but God is faithful. You did not believe God, God is faithful. That's his point. God is faithful, always. In fact, if we go to chapter 1 of Deuteronomy, from verses 29 to 31, it reads, "Then I said to you, don't tremble or be afraid of them. Adonai your God, who was before you," that's one, he was before them, "he himself will fight for you just as he did for you in Egypt before your own eyes." That's the second point. "And in the wilderness, when you saw how Adonai your God carried you as a man carries his son." That's the third point. He's making 3 points of how faithful God is. Everywhere you went until you came to this place. So let's break this down. Who goes before you? Which means he's always making a way for us. He's always there in front of us, preparing the way. Sometimes we do things our ways. And then, when things go wrong, we turn to God to help us. When actually God is saying, listen, follow me. It's like, I don't know, I bring an example. It's like we go walking in the country, me and my wife, and there's a lot of bushes and things. So I go in front of her, I walk, and if nothing happens to me, she can follow in those footsteps. If nothing happens to Martin, it is safe for me to step on that place. There's no thorns, there's no scorpions, there's no snakes. Same is with God. If we follow him, we can never get hurt. Again, sometimes we do things our way and we mess it up, but God is faithful and he will still help us to stand up again from our situation, even when we truly, really mess it up. Actually, most of us, we messed it up all our lives before God started to help us. This is also what we are studying in our Bible teachings of Psalm 119, where it says that through affliction we get nearer to God. He will help us going through affliction, but that we will talk in our Bible study. Second point that Moses is making, he himself will fight for you. He himself will fight for you. The mistake we make is that we read the Bible as a book and we stop there. We don't truly believe what we are reading. We just read it as a story. Oh, look what happened to the Israelites. Wow, God was there. Oh, God is good. But do we really believe that what God did with the Israelites, he can do with us today? And that's the main point. Again, when affliction comes, do we really believe that God can do for us what he did to the Israelites when they were in Egypt? Why not? When we are faced with the sea in front of us and the enemy behind us, God can make a way. Even Luke says in Luke chapter 18, verse 8, when Yeshua comes, will he find faith on the earth? Now, what is faith? Faith is not, yes, I believe in Jesus. That is not faith. Faith is truly believing in Jesus. Faith is obeying Yeshua. Faith is walking the walk, going back to the old path, going back to the Torah. That is faith. The third point that Moses was making, and in the wilderness, where you saw how Adonai, your God, carried you like a man carries his son. Now, what is the wilderness? We already talked about this when we were describing the Parasha, where the snakes attacked the Israelites. The wilderness, it was full of snakes and scorpions. They were there. But God was carrying his people like a father carries his son. That's why they were not bitten. He was taking care of them. And this is why Moses had to rebuke the people. They kept forgetting what God did for them, how he opened the sea. And these people, many of them, maybe not this generation, because remember, this was a new generation. But even the generation before them, those who died in the desert, they saw how God opened the sea for them. They saw how the earth swallowed people. I mean, they saw God doing miracles for them, but still they murmured, still they were rebellious. And that is what Moses is saying to the new generation who are there in front of Canaan. They can see Canaan. And he says, remember what God did for your fathers and even for you in the desert. But then again, more than a rebuke, this is also a reminder of what God can do for his people. Also, what God can do for us. And this, even Paul speaks about it in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11, where it says, now, these things happened to them as an example, and it was written down as a warning to us, on whom the end of the ages have come. So Paul is saying, listen, what happened there, it is for us, as an example. So, like God was helping the Israelites, we can be sure that God is helping us. We have them as an example. How many times they were in trouble, how many times God took them out of that trouble. Every time. The same he does for us. That's why Paul is saying this is an example for us. Again, that's why we need to be careful. When we read the Bible, we don't just read the book, but really study what God is saying. We also need to keep in mind that when Moses spoke these words in the book of Deuteronomy, the Israelites were in the place they could see the promised land. They could see it. Wow, it's there. This is our land. They kept forgetting who took them there. It also says in chapter 1, verse 1 and 2, that they were only 11 days away from Horeb, where God gave them the Torah. So between Mount Horeb and the land of Canaan, it was an 11 days journey. How come they took 40 years traveling an 11 days journey? Why? What's the reason? Again, lack of faith, lack of trust in God's word. Evidenced by complaining, murmuring, outright rebellion, unbelief, disobedience to Jehovah's commandments. That's why it took them 40 years. And this is the reason why Moses was rebuking the people, but also remembering them that God, even through these circumstances, even when they were complaining, they were murmuring, they were being rebellious, even through their unbelief and disobedience, God was always faithful with them. This is one of the reasons many people give up their walk. They fall short, they sin, and then they are afraid to come back because now God will not forgive me. And then they keep going back in their walk. Then from chapter 1 verse 8 to verse 18 we read about the appointments of the tribal leaders. And when reading this week's Parasha, we have to notice that while Moses is speaking about the leaders to be appointed, you know that he skipped a word. What do I mean? Go with me to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 1, verse 13. Now, be careful what you are reading. Be careful, pay attention to what I'm saying. Verse 13. Provide for yourself, Moses is talking to the tribes. Provide for yourself distinguished men, one, they are distinguished, who are wise, understanding, and well-known. Now, go to verse 15. And Moses is saying, so I took of your tribes distinguished men who were wise and well-known. What happened to the understanding part? Do you notice that the word understanding is missing in verse 15? Why? What does the word understanding mean? In Hebrew it's the word bi'in. In the strong concordance it means discerning. perceptive, discreet, intelligent, observant, and prudent. Now, why did Moses have such a difficult time finding such a man to be leaders in Israel? They were distinguished, they were wise, they were well-known people. But he was finding it hard to find people who can use discernment. The question is, are today's people in the churches any different? Does all the Christian leaders leading churches today have the qualifications as established in the Bible? Come on, let's see what the qualifications are. If we go to 1 Timothy 3, verses 2 and 3. Now, the overseer is to be above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. Whoa, I can name tens, even hundreds of evangelical preachers who come short to these qualifications. Even in Titus chapter 1, verses 6 to 9. An elder must be blameless, at least since he came to Christ, because his past is forgiven. An elder must be blameless, faithful to his wife, a man whose children believe and are not open to the charge of being wild and disobedient. Since overseers manages God's household, he must be blameless, not overbearing, not quick-tempered, not given to drunkenness, not violent, not pursuing dishonest gain. Rather, he must be hospitable, one who loves what is good, one who is self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firmly to the trustworthy message as it has been taught, so that he can encourage others to sound doctrine and refute those who oppose it. Wow, Moses was having a problem finding this kind of people. And we have the same problem in today's churches. When you see the ways that many church leaders live. Anyway, but not only, but also then there are the spiritual level of leadership, which we find in Ephesians. Again, in 1 Corinthians, it talks about spiritual leaders. And James chapter 2 speaks about that the leader should not be a respecter of persons. Sometimes this is hard to keep in the churches. During their 40 years in the desert, the Israelites made 42 stops. But if you read chapter 1 of the book of Deuteronomy, we see that Moses only mentions 7 places. Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 1, verse 1. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel across the Jordan. In the wilderness, 1. In the Arabah opposite Suf. Between Param and Tophel. Laban, Hazoret, and Dizahab. Now remember, guys, this is the diary of Moses. In this verse, Moses is reminding the people of the most outstanding 7 sins, which resulted in Israel being condemned to wander the wilderness for 40 years. Why? Again, let's go through the list. In the wilderness. Exodus chapter 16, verses 1 to 3, it says that the Israelites had sinned by complaining about the lack of food. So that was their first sin. They were complaining about the lack of food in the wilderness. In Arabah they provoked God when they gave in for the temptation, when they were seduced by the Midianite woman. You remember when Balaam could not curse them, but he said to Balak, listen, this is what you do. Mix with them. They will like the woman, and they will mix and mingle with them. And that's what happened. And they started worshipping false gods through it. This is in Numbers 36, verse 13. The third place, Yam Suf, which is the Sea of Reeds. where they murmured that they were going to die. It is in Exodus 14:11. Another sin the Israelites did in the desert, between Paran, is where the incident of the spies happened. Numbers 13, verse 14. At Tophel and Laban, the people spoke with contempt about the food and the manna. In Hazeroth is where we see the rebellion of Korah. And finally, we came to the last place, which is Dizab, is where they angered God with the golden calf. Now, these names, they did not exist before things happened. I mean, the place where they worshipped the golden calf, they named it Dizab because of the golden calf. It is where we get the word Deb, gold in Maltese. If you take out the letter Z, you will end up with Dab, which we turned into Deb, gold. But it was called gold because they were worshipping the golden calf. Like in also Laban, which means white. They named the place Laban white because the manna was white. But as I was saying, Moses mentions these 7 places to remind Israel about the 7 dirtiest sins they committed. Murmuring, not having faith in God, worshipping false idols. That's why he mentions the 7 places. To conclude, Moses reminded the Israelites of how, because of those shortcomings, because of sin, pride, rebellion, murmuring, faithlessness, idolatry, and greed, that's the 7 sins, an 11-day journey from Sinai to Canaan resulted in a 40-year trek just on the outskirts of the Promised Land. They were there 40 years, but they couldn't go in. The journey took Israel from Sinai to across the Jordan River into the Promised Land. So Israel went from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea. Does it make any sense? No. From Horeb to Kadesh Barnea. But wait a second. What does the word Horeb mean? It means waste. What does Kadesh Barnea mean? Set apart, fruitful fields. So from being nothing, from being a wasteless people, now they were going to the set apart place with fruitful fields. A reference to the Promised Land. So, like the Israelites, people in the desert, we are also on a journey from being nothing, because we were in sin, being waste, to being set apart. This is our journey. Like the Israelites, we come short, we fall. But as Moses is saying throughout the book of Deuteronomy, God is faithful. Every time we sin, He's always there to forgive us if we truly come to Him. We also face struggles and challenges, but we must always have faith, knowing that God is walking before us. He's making the way, preparing the way for us. And He is always there to carry us like a father carries his son. And this is how we need to truly study the Bible. Just reading that God can carry us like a father carries his son, just reading that, it means nothing. You need to sit down, meditate. What does it mean? Let's say a father is carrying his son in a path in a country and there's a lot of thorns. Who's taking the thorns in his legs? The father, not the son. The same like Yeshua did. Who took all the beatings for us? Who was nailed to a tree for us? Who was carrying us? He still is. And that is our faith. Knowing that by the death of Yeshua, we have forgiveness. And this is grace. And because of what Yeshua did for us, we choose to obey His words, obey His commandments, obey His Torah. And that's how we are set apart from other people. How are we set apart from the Gentiles? By keeping the Torah. Gentiles, they do not keep the Torah. That's what set apart means. Amen? Let's break for some time and then we start worshiping the Lord.